So let's understand the current solution. But before moving to the solution, we will understand the meaning of importer and exporter. Okay. So let's just suppose there is a Mr. A, okay, who is willing to start the business of furniture. Okay. But to sell the furniture in their area, the area is, or we can say, there is no forest in the country. However, it is a hypothetical situation also. But Mr. A is unable to find any type of forest in the country, or we can say raw material, unable to find raw material for processing the furniture in his country. So what he does, he checks with his friend, one of his friends, Mr. B, residing in another country. Let's say Mr. A is living in country I, and Mr. B is residing in country U. Okay. Now what happens? Mr. A asked Mr. B that, are you able to send me the wood logs so that I can make furniture out of them? So Mr. B says, okay, I will do that. Now what happens? Mr. A becomes importer. Okay. Why importer? Because importer is a person who imports the goods outside of his country from a foreign country. Okay. So the country U is a foreign country for Mr. A. Similarly, country I is also a foreign country for Mr. B also. So in that case, Mr. A will be considered as an importer and Mr. B will be considered as an exporter who exports the woodlogs to Mr. A for processing the main goods, or we can say furniture. Okay. Now Mr. B will transfer the woodlogs like raw material, we can say. Okay. And against that, Mr. B will make payment to Mr. A will make payment to Mr. B also against the purchase of raw material. Okay. Now what happens? There are this this whole process. This whole process is known as import export. Please write down this example for better future reference. Okay. Import export procedure. To enable, or we can say to facilitate the process of importing and exporting between two different countries or between multiple countries, there applies import export procedure. Okay. Applicable in respect of a a specific country. Okay. Now what happens, there are two types of agreements between exporter and importer. Let's write down them. Two types of agreements between importer and exporter. Okay. However, those two agreements will differ in entirety, like they are very different from each other. The first one is freight on board, we can say FOB. Okay. And in second case we have CIF. Okay. It's cost, insurance, and freight. See, there are there are different types of contracts available in the in real world. Okay, however, these both contracts are very popular among the among various importers and exporters. Okay, but there is a very important difference in these two agreements. What is that? In first one, that is freight on board, the buyer, or we can say the importer. So who is buyer? Mr. A is a buyer. Okay, so importer or buyer is the same thing. However, in import and export procedure, we refer buyer as a importer. So you can write it down so that it will be simpler to understand as well as remember also. Okay, so what happens in freight on board contract? The buyer is responsible for payment of shipment expenses. Like, what happens now if Mr. B, okay, if Mr. B is sending wood logs to Mr. A, okay, let's say through Mr. B is sending the material through ship. Now what happens? The transportation cost of the ship, okay, which will be chargeable by ship owner, will be payable by Mr. A in case of freight on board basis. So I'm writing freight. Please write it down to get clear distinction between these types of contracts. Okay, freight to be paid by Mr. A, okay, because he is the importer, he is the buyer also. Okay, but in second case, what happens? The seller will be, or we can say, as per our example, Mr. B will pay these expenses. What these expenses? These expenses. These expenses, like cost of insurance and freight. Okay, so we have derived our solution. What the question has asked us, that which of the following statement is true. So out of the available options, the first option is correct option, which says that in case of freight on board contract also, what happens? The responsibility of goods passes on to buyer. Okay, the responsibility of goods passes on to buyer as the goods are shipped. Okay, so the correct choice is A. You can jot down first as well as second sheet onto your notebooks for future reference also. However, our correct solution is choice A. Okay, that's all for our solution. Thank you.